I will bear your blessings to battle. I am ready for the trials ahead. I am the rising dawn. And I will lead us into a new age.
Oh, poor Falcon. To be absolutely clear, it will be avenged. Ra demands it. Before we begin,
the war machine going as well as the weapons and armor of the soldiers, but this time we're gonna take a look at the New Kingdom's army composition, native troops, mercenaries, and some of the tactics the ancient Egyptians used against their enemies. Once again, to understand the real strength of the New Kingdom, we have to take a little trip back in time. In the 17th century BC, Egypt experienced foreign occupation for the first time in its history. The Canaanites, known as the Hyksos or PHARAOH, overtook Lower Egypt. To make a bad situation even worse, to the south, the lands of Nubia, Egypt's main source of gold and exotic trade goods, broke free from Egyptian rule. The Middle Kingdom was shattered, but the spirit of the Egyptian people was unbroken. They experienced a massive technological revolution in this time period. Egyptian smiths quickly learned bronze working, and the weapons of the enemy, such as the composite bow, sickle sword, and chariots, were soon turned against them. Combining this newfound technology with the military reforms of the pharaohs of the 18th and 19th dynasties, the New Kingdom would rise as one of the strongest powers in the known world for a period of 3 centuries. Subjugating Canaan, Nubia, fighting off the invading Libu tribes, the Mitanni and Hittites, and during the collapse of the Bronze Age, Egypt would be one of the only major powers that successfully fought against and survived multiple invasions of the Sea Peoples and other ethnic groups that were invading the world at the time. But what actually made this possible? Besides Ramses III basically destroying the kingdom's treasury to fund the war, basically to the point of bankruptcy. Its first and most important army corps, the infantry. For a period of 3 centuries, despite all their technological innovations in chariotry dominating warfare in the Middle East, the core of the Egyptian army remained its massive, well-trained infantry force. While all the other powers of the region were mainly focused around their elite chariots supported by infantry, Egypt was the complete opposite. For centuries before the addition of the chariot, Egypt had experience fighting as an infantry-only army, and with the New Kingdom reforms, large numbers of chariots were used in a supporting role of a large number of highly trained professional soldiers and levies. Thanks to the many blessings and occasional curse of the Nile, Egypt was estimated to have a population of up to 4 million at this point. Even though I gotta be honest with you, I feel a lot more people live in the Nile than this. The infantry was divided into 2 main groups, the archers and the close combat troops. Archers were extremely important in Egypt since the earliest periods of recorded history, so much that the bowstring was the hieroglyphic symbol that was used for the army, and even as a symbol of strength. Both native Egyptians and Nubians from the lands of Wawat and Medja were recruited, with the earliest written evidence of Nubian mercenaries appearing during the 6th dynasty around 2300 BC. They were so important to Egyptian military success that not only were they settled within Egypt proper, but we also have written documents from the so-called Amarna period where Egyptian vassals in Canaan were sent whole regiments of Nubian archers. Besides these 2 major components, auxiliary archers and slingers or mercenaries from the nomadic Shasu, Abiru, or Canaanite vassal city-states, or settled Libyans were recruited en masse by the time of Ramses II. Despite the Egyptian infantry being armed with very deadly melee weapons, the bow was the main killing power of the army. Against lightly armed nomadic raiders such as the Abiru or various Libyan tribes, mass volleys of arrows were often enough to decide battles, sometimes even before any hand-to-hand fighting would actually happen. One of the most famous battles that was carried by the archery corps happened during the reign of the pharaoh Merneptah. In his 5th year of rule, the most powerful Libyan tribal confederation known as the Meshwesh subjugated neighboring tribes, led by their high chief Merieh. They allied with the infamous Sea People, at the time consisting of the Lukka, Ekwesh, Teresh, Sherden, and Shekelesh groups. At an estimated number of 40,000 troops, this alliance quickly advanced into the western delta until the Battle of Perire. It is said that the Egyptian archers rained hell on the enemy army for 6 hours without a break. We don't have any historical mention of what the infantry was exactly doing, but it's safe to assume that they were deployed in a defensive manner to hold against the enemy horde. While the Egyptians were deadly warriors, the Sea People were known for their brutality in close combat. After 6 agonizing hours of archer volleys, the pharaoh ordered his chariots to charge. This caused widespread panic amongst the already depleted allied ranks. They started fleeing and were quickly ran down by the fast Egyptian chariots. At least 6,000 enemies were counted dead, and 9,000, potentially a little bit more, were taken prisoner. If that doesn't speak to the efficiency of the bow and chariot, I don't know what does. The infantry corps of Egypt was as diverse as the many gods they worshipped. From native Egyptians, whose equipment we've previously covered, settled in mercenary Libyans. The ones that were settled within the western delta, and in general Lower Egypt, were equipped in an Egyptian fashion. That's no surprise, right? But here's where it gets actually interesting. The mercenary Libyans often came dressed in their traditional battle garb of animal skins and sheath. But now, even trickier. They were equipped, sometimes, with bronze armor and weapons, European swords of the Nawed II type to be more precise. How could tribesmen from such a poor land come into possession of this sword? Well, you'll find soon enough on this channel. Nubian infantry equipped with both Egyptian weaponry and traditional Nubian bronze-tipped club and spears. Canaanite vassals from many city-states and petty kingdoms, ranging from Canaanite sword and axe-equipped infantry to skirmishers to even the elite Marianu. Taken from an inscription from the Battle of Kadesh, we have the mention of Ne'arin, which would be the equivalent of the Marianu, very heavily equipped elites. And last but not least, multiple groups of sea people, ranging from prisoners of war to actual mercenaries, were present from the reign of Ramses II and onwards into the collapse. So many different people with different customs, but they all had 2 things in common. Number 1, they love to shout and let it all out. And number 2, javelins. From what we have documented in sources, Egyptian infantry very rarely acted defensively unless they were forced to buy time or were ambushed, like the battles of Perire and Kadesh, respectively. They would charge into battle and shout war cries, while the musicians would also try to be as loud as possible. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any real information or reliable reconstruction on how that might have sounded, but apparently it was enough to make some enemies their pants. Okay, they didn't really wear pants at the time. Loincloths? Kilts? Better? While the archers would rain hell from above, the Egyptian close combat troops, led by the Nakhtu'a, would shower the enemy with javelins and charge into bloody battle. Sometimes the sheer sight of the army and elaborate parading of Egyptian troops was enough to make enemies retreat before a single arrow was fired. We've covered the infantry, but now it's time to take a look at the fast and deadly chariots of the New Kingdom. Egyptian chariots were unique amongst the chariot-heavy armies of this period. While initially modeled after the Canaanites due to the Ixos influence, they quickly evolved into their most recognizable design. They were extremely light, with great maneuverability and speed thanks to the slider frame and the 6-spoked wheel. This allowed them to operate in a bit rougher terrain compared to other chariots, but more importantly, it turned them into a fantastic scouting and flank support unit for the infantry corps that was capable of dealing with enemy chariots. Obviously, if Canaanite or Hittite chariots would crash into them and force a melee fight, Egyptian light chariots stood less than zero chance, but this is where the speed comes into play. Egyptian chariots would move towards the enemies and skirmish with their composite bows, and if it came to close range, also javelins. If the enemy chariots ran away, they would be ran down and killed. If they insisted on a charge, the Egyptian chariots were deployed in precisely determined spacing, so that they would have room to maneuver and let the enemies slide through without crashing into them. This is where another vital tactic to Egyptian success comes in, the PHARAOH, or known to us as the chariot runners. Handpicked from the fastest and most athletic soldiers, they would follow chariots into battle, armed with a spear, javelins, and depending on sources, even a bow. After the charge, they would kill or capture enemy crewmen or rescue Egyptian crews that crashed and survived. However, their main task was to try and stop enemy chariot charges if they moved past the friendly chariots, so they would be stuck between Egyptian forces on both sides. We have depictions of sea people in the Egyptian army at Kadesh killing Hittite chariot crewmen, so it's safe to assume that some amongst them were also recruited as chariot runners. There's a lot more to be said about chariots than just this, but I wouldn't wait too long for that, because you're probably gonna get that very, very soon on this channel. To sum it up, when it comes to army deployment. Traditionally, infantry would be put in the center, with skirmishers advancing to pepper the enemies, and the chariots and supporting chariot runners would be on the flanks. The Egyptians would charge, supported by their missile troops, and the chariots, meanwhile, would try to either distract or destroy the enemy counterparts. Well, there you have it. Another episode done, and we've definitely learned something about Egyptian tactics or some interesting mercenary facts. Where's the next episode gonna take us? You're just gonna have to wait and find out. As always, I appreciate your continued support. Any kind of liking or sharing the video or even subbing is obviously very appreciated, but you know, I'm just happy if you enjoyed the video. I love producing anything informative. I just love going through all my possible books on the topic. It's just fun doing research, or better said, research. But yeah, that's it for this time, so until the next episode,